Yeah, and what I've learned and what I'm learning in my journey, which will continue, is it's not about the repression of those things. It's not about the banishment of those things. Those things are part of me. Call them shadow, call them whatever you will, but they are part of me. And what we suppress or what we repress persists. And so it's actually about making friends with those things, integrating them, welcoming them in, learning what they have to teach, and then finding practices, approaches, environments, constraints that you can provide the benefit that they seek without the downside that they threaten. And that's an ongoing journey, not complete.
Welcome to this week's episode of People Are the Answer. I truly believe that people are the only answer to the world's many problems. I'm Jeffrey M. Zucker, a serial entrepreneur here to learn how innovators are creating outsized, transformational social impact and to shine a light on all the good happening in a world often hyper-focused on the negative. Today's episode features Skippy Mesirow, founder and coach at the Elected Leaders Collective, a Colorado Natural Medicine Advisory Board member, and a former Aspen City Councilperson. His life's mission is to heal our politics, and he's got a great podcast that's brand new of that same name. Skippy and I discuss his upbringing, working in the Obama campaign and other political endeavors, his time filming a travel show in Laos, his love for Aspen and the effort he's put toward that, the importance of self-awareness and vulnerability, and so much more. This was a really fun episode, and it was also really deep, and I hope you enjoy it as much as I did. Here is Skippy Mesirow on People Are the Answer. Skippy, thanks so much for joining me on People Are the Answer.
Thanks for having me, bud. It's nice to be on this side of the mic.
Yeah, absolutely. I can imagine having gone on some other people's podcasts. I kind of get to live out my dream of just showing up at the mic and talking and then turning around and it's over. So I can certainly appreciate that.
Well, I thought it was funny because we're using Riverside to record, which is what we use too. And I do this all the time now, and I really look forward to it. And I prep, and then when I didn't get to press the button to go 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, now I'm like, oh shit, now I'm nervous. It's so funny, not having the control button over on this side. So it's good to put myself in the guest shoes.
Awesome. Yeah, I appreciate it. And while we're talking about how you're on the other side of the mic, tell me a little bit about your podcast.
Yeah, so the show is called the Healing Our Politics Podcast. It's the show that shows you, the heart-centered leader, how to heal our politics by starting with the human in the mirror. It really couldn't be more timely, to be honest. And it's a long-form interview show that does two things. We speak to world-class experts in all areas of human development, and we translate the best of what they've learned specifically for the public service experience. So I'm recording with Byron Kait this week, who's a remarkable person in the self-development world. And many people will know the work. But if you are a mayor and you are super frustrated with a constituent, how do you apply that in your own service such that you can come back to a place to de-escalate, connect, and be effective rather than right or angry? And then we also have long-form conversations with public servants who have a practice of some kind. Jonathan Capelli is our first episode. Most people wouldn't recognize his name, although he runs an organization that probably touches housing security for more Coloradans than anyone in the state. And he has ADHD and was diagnosed in the last year with bipolar. And so it's a real human conversation of what it's like to be in leadership, dealing with our own struggles, our own challenges, and what are the things we've found. And they're not always obvious, right? It's not always the do A to get B. Jonathan talks a lot about his relationship to nature and the outdoors as the way that he comes back to center. And so it's just
awesome.
It's a cool place to finally get human about what it's actually like to be in positions of leadership where you have the opportunity to really help up-level our communities.
Yeah, That's it's beautiful. I love the perspective that you're coming from, and I mean, especially when it comes to politics these days, I feel like so much of it is, as you know, so divisive, and so there's a lot of hatred involved, and it's frustrating when the reality is everyone in politics should be trying to make a mutually wonderful place for all of us. That's got to be the true goal, and I love the idea that there's people currently in those positions that can be healed, and hopefully that will lead us to a place where people who already have the right mindset are actually able to climb into those positions. Because I feel like these days it's really tough to get to some of these leadership roles without, kind of putting others aside.
Yeah, I would agree and I would question that. And I think it depends, as most things do, on what our locus of focus is. Like, who are we talking about when we say that? And most of us are tapped into traditional mainstream media, whether that's Fox, MSNBC, CNN, or to social media. And those are all organizations that play a vital role, but there's a incentive for them to focus on the fires. And there's a focus, or there's an incentive for them to focus on the quote unquote top, the higher positions. And so, yes, if we are looking at presidential politics right now, it's hard to see it as anything other than a dumpster fire. No matter what side of the aisle you're on is irrelevant. It's kind of a sad state of affairs. And when looking at that piece of politics, what you say is absolutely true. It's both hard to enter those positions without adopting some of the tactics that have been working for folks, not for us, the folks, not for the citizens, not for community, but for the people in those roles, to maintain those roles and those positions of influence. But the truth is, in the United States of America, there's about 519,000 people in elected office, and over 500,000 of those are none of those things. They're your county commissioner, they're your local mayor, they're your school board member. And in those places, it's actually quite different. The vast majority of people get into those positions because they just want to make a difference. They didn't like the anger on the school board and wanted to get back to education, and so they decided to join. They really felt strongly about housing or mental health policy in their local community, and they realized, oh wow, so much of what actually touches our lives is local. It's not what happens in Washington. And those positions are available to those folks. However, the toxicity of that media landscape of our national politics increasingly has impinged upon those local places. And we're all culpable in that. We're culpable in that as leaders who come in with our own baggage and expel it at a council table. We are culpable if we are citizens who show up to a meeting not with questions but with demands and threats, with anger, and we are mostly all contributing in some way, unconsciously and innocently, to cultivating the conditions that we claim not to want, which is a politics of fear. And when we're locked in a fearful place, we don't have the cognitive ability to do the higher function systems of empathy and listening and compassion and collaboration that are actually necessary to achieve the results we want. And so it becomes beautifully then our individual responsibility to take up the mantle of active citizen or active leader. And what can I do to retrain myself to show up in the way I actually want to yield the results that I know we all need and be a vector for that healing?
Yeah, I know that's a really great way to put it. And to have the self-awareness of knowing how you want to go into something and how you want to act, and that is so important. And certainly on the local level, there's a lot more of that, I would say. And certainly I've met plenty of people in local politics that are truly there because they want to affect the place where their family lives and where their friends are, etc. So it's really interesting. I'm excited to dig in as your show develops. I did start Jonathan's episode yesterday. I got a phone call and then forgot to finish. Unfortunately, I'm sorry, but I was really enjoying it.
What stood out to you, if anything? I'm just curious.
I just like the straightforwardness with that you came forward, that you sort of asked questions with. I mean, he clearly showed up to be open and honest. Like, it seemed like you cultivated a good environment for the conversation.
Mm, yeah, I really appreciate that. It's one of the things that I don't know if people will get or connect with, but for me, bringing back the humanity into our politics, which is ultimately a system and a collection of people, is a very human, an organic organism. And in forgetting that, we disable ourselves from receiving the results we want. And so I'm hoping in opening up the humanity of the experience, we can recognize then that the application of humanity is a strength and bring ourselves back to a more generative place.
Yeah, I think it's a great direction to go for us and to point us in. I appreciate that, and you're doing really cool work in so many ways. And I'm curious, in life in general, what do you say motivates you?
I've heard you. I've listened to a good number of your podcasts now, and I've heard you ask the motivation or drive question, and I wondered if I was going to get it or not. And I really did my best to keep a clear mind because you said, come in with an open mind." And this might sound like a dumb question, but when you say motivates you, what do you actually mean by that?
What makes you want to spend your time on the things that you spend your time on? And that's part of it. And also, like, what in your life motivates you to spend time on things, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Hopefully, I'm going to give you a cogent answer because I think it's multifaceted, and I would like to give you the full picture as I think through this out loud. Thank you, audience. um, there is part of it that is compulsion. I have always had a motor on me. I don't really know how to sit still. I have a sleep mode and a go mode. And that can be applied in different ways. It doesn't all have to be work in spreadsheets. It could be travel, etc. But I don't have the thing in me that will allow me to sit on the couch. It just doesn't exist for me. It never has. And I think in some ways that comes down to fear of death and impermanence. I adore my life. I feel so grateful to have somehow been called into existence in this impossibly complex and giant universe. And I feel compelled to do something with that. But I also feel compelled to leave a legacy, to leave an impact that will live on beyond me. I'm sure you've heard this quote. I first heard it at a 9/11 memorial from Dick Merritt, who's an amazing veteran, is involved in the fire service here. Incredible human, does veterans work. But it's, you die twice, right? The day your heart stops beating and the day the last person says your name. And it's less to me about the saying of the name, but it's more about the embodied memory that persists because of what you've left. My grandma passed away a couple of years ago, and the ways that she shows up in my life daily that I'm reminded of her is that for me. And so I hope to do that for others. I think that that's part of it. There's another part that is very mission driven, but interestingly, kind of non-specifically. I've always felt like politics were the place where I could make change at scale, or at least in my adult life, since I was in college or so. Before that, I didn't think about it much. And so I've always been called to have an impact in that space, but I never really knew or cared how. It didn't come with a title or a position. It was just, how can I have the biggest impact given the experiences I have to bear and the unique contributions that I can make. And so I'm still very animated by that mission and that sense of purpose. Um, I think both of those things profoundly motivate me. And then I think there's also the piece of the ego, of vanity or fear that drives me in some way. And I'd like to pretend like that's not a driver, but I'm sure it is. The fear of not being accepted, the fear of not fitting in, the fear of exile, those contribute in some meaningful way to me wanting to do things of service for others, in the hopes that, and I do get to be part of the tribe, the in group, the accepted folks, that I'll have friends and caregivers, and people will see me in a positive light. I mean, I think I have to own that that's part of it too.
Yeah, I mean, I can relate to that 100%. It's as much as you don't want to, or as much as you try to push that out, and certainly there's work you can do to try to get rid of it as you can. But at least for me, it's always there in some capacity.
Yeah, and what I've learned and what I'm learning in my journey, which will continue, is it's not about the repression of those things. It's not about the banishment of those things. Those things are part of me. Call them shadow, call them whatever you will, but they are part of me. And what we suppress or what we repress persists. And so it's actually about making friends with those things, integrating them, welcoming them in, learning what they have to teach, and then finding practices, approaches, environments, constraints that you can provide the benefit that they seek without the downside that they threaten. And that's an ongoing journey, not complete.
Yeah, for all of us, but to me, it circles back to that self-awareness. I mean, to be able to have those conversations about yourself is important to, I think, be effective in what you want to accomplish.
I would agree. It's hard to know where you're going without a map.
Yes, exactly. And when people come up to you and they ask what you do, and to me, that's like always like, oh man, that's a kind of a rough question because I do 100 things. How do you tend to answer that?
Ooh, let's try this. Let's test it. You come up to me and say, "Hey, what do you do?" And I say, "I help leaders heal themselves and their communities."
I like it. I mean, that's such a powerful role as well. And you said that you're working to heal leaders, right? And where did you grow up, and what were the leaders around you there like?
Hmm. I grew up in the northern suburbs of Chicago. So I was born in Evanston, for anyone
Hmm.
who's familiar. I grew up between, roughly birth, like 6 months or a year. My memory is a little hazy from back then.
That's fair.
And somewhere to like 7 or 8 with my grandparents and my mom in Glencoe, Illinois. And then when my parents each got remarried, they ended up in Highland Park, my mom and stepdad, and Northbrook. My dad had been in Northbrook, but dad and stepmother. Highland Park High School, and then kind of made my way out to Colorado as soon as I physically could. So that was the place that I grew up. In terms of leaders, what I recall is really pedestaling my grandfather. He was sort of the one person in my life that I sort of deified and looked up to. And really, for most of my upbringing, he was the sole person that I thought of in that way. I didn't have any other family members that I particularly looked up to in that way. As I got older, my grandmother, his wife, came into that role. He was the masculine. He was doing, working, providing, you know, athletic adventures, big bike rides, skiing, doctor, kind of more of the outward stuff that maybe is more obvious to pay attention to. My grandmother was, sort of a wellness person well before there was a name for that back in the 50s and 60s. And when I look back, even in the 60s, she had a daily meditation practice. She was a vegan. Not that there's anything right or wrong about being a vegan, but it was just very, sort of that was very rare then. Interesting that, in her 80s and 90s, she moved back to eating animal protein. But she was just someone who was very wise. She would always say, we're from a Jewish family, and she cared a lot about the traditions and the history, but she would always say she was spiritual. And I kind of rolled my eyes and was like, what the hell does that even mean? But it's funny, as I became older and myself found so many of the things that she had found 40 years before, that I began to see her in that light. And she didn't need to proselytize. She didn't need to convince. She had that real quiet confidence of someone who's actually done the work. I remember the last Thanksgiving before she passed away, I was in Palm Springs visiting her with my sister. And at that point, I had a meditation practice for maybe a year and a half, 2 years, something like that. And I just said to her, I was like, why did you never encourage my mom and I to do this? And she just looked at me in her way and went, do you think you were ready?
That's so good.
And
Wow.
I was like, yeah, it's a great point. And so because it wasn't thrust upon me, I didn't necessarily see or appreciate it until later, but with even more admiration now that I can see. So those were really my two, early in life.
It is, remarkable that you got the opportunity to see your grandmother in that light as you grew wiser. And I think that's something I'm sure that you cherish. And it sounds like your grandfather was remarkable to have around growing up. And, I imagine, given what you do now, that most of these individuals in your life treated others well.
Yeah. Yeah. They certainly both did. I also, had a pretty chaotic family upbringing in other ways. So I also got to see a lot of the behavior I didn't want to mimic.
Yeah, that makes sense. And were there any particular memories growing up where, giving back really hit home for you and you're like, I need to do this in my life?
Hmm. I'll take the coachy advice for myself, which is just to go with the first thing that popped into my head. And I'm not sure that it actually answers your question, but the first thing that popped in your head. So that same grandfather, who worked and achieved and provided a life that no one in his family had previous for us. He also was stricken with Parkinson's. He had a stroke in his 60s. I'm not sure that it was right around when I was born. So, yep. And a lot of complications. And so when I was kind of in that age range of like 8 to 15, his physical decline was continuing. And for those who don't know, Parkinson's can present in a number of different ways. There's sort of the shaking and the tremor version. There's also a freezing version, and sometimes there's an overlap. But he had the freezing version more. And so, sometimes he'd be trying to get out of the shower and muscles would totally seize up. And this was the memory that came to me. And I just remember, going in there as a little kid and just kind of holding his hand and his back and staying with him for probably like 2-3 hours until he could move again. I wouldn't know how to not do that. I wish I could do it right now. I wish I could do it again. It's a weird thing to miss, but
No, I
that
get
was
it.
a memory that popped into my head. I don't even remember your question.
No, it was just about examples of doing good and that you learned from, that inspired you. But that makes total sense. That I think that at a young age, when you see the impact that you can have on someone else's life, then that, at least for me, would really hit home as a kid. Like, this one thing that I can do can really change someone's life, and I should do that.
Yeah, and I think it's really more implicit than explicit message that I receive from them is really the concept of tikkun olam, which I think you've talked about it in another podcast, but a Jewish phrase, but certainly not owned by anyone. I'm sure every tradition has something similar, but it's the repair of the world, and I'm always remembered of the quote, which I will now paraphrase, not quote, but it is not our sponsor, not my responsibility to complete the work, but neither may I desist from doing my part. And I think that just was ingrained in me through the observation of their behaviors in our community, that those of us that have the, um, you know, those of us with privilege should also accept the responsibility and to leverage that privilege for the benefit of others as best we can. And so I think that's what sticks with me.
Absolutely. And I couldn't agree more. And you'd mentioned previously, like you were, in a rush to get to Colorado when you left Illinois. What, and I'm in Denver, you're in Aspen. What drew you to this state?
Those same grandparents. My grandfather served in the war, not World War II. I think it was the Korean War, but he didn't serve in Korea. He wasn't combat. He served he was a doctor, so medical. And the story goes that they were stationed in the French Alps. I haven't independently confirmed this, but that's what my mom has said. And so they found out about skiing and the mountains and loved it. And then when they came, thereafter, they started looking around for places to do that. And they ended up settling on Aspen. They purchased a condo in Aspen in 1964. It was like one of the first 4-story structures in town. Unfortunately for all of us, they then sold it in 72. But they bought a place in Snowmass, like a townhome kind of vibe in Snowmass. And so from the time I was little, they had both, I mean, Stein Eriksen is, one of the people that, really stood up the ski industry in the U.S., but certainly in Aspen, and then went on to start Deer Valley in Utah. He taught my mom and my uncle to ski as little ones. Wow. I was on skis at 18 months. And so, it was kind of, if I had more than a couple days off of school, we would be going to their place. And so it was always my happy place. I went to camp in Colorado as a, I don't know, 4th, 5th, 6th grader, something like that. Anderson Ranch camps, which was out in the middle of nowhere. I'm a kid from Chicago, but I'm like dodging rattlesnakes and shooting shotguns and building fires and rafting the Grand and caving. And That's awesome. I loved it. And I didn't particularly like home for a lot of reasons. So yeah, it was the place that I loved. I was obsessed with skiing. For a very long time. And I really wanted to do a gap year after high school. But I knew that if I did, I was not going to go back to school because I'm not a fan of I love to learn. I'm hyper curious, but when you tell me what I have to learn, it kind of ruins it for me.
I'm exactly the same. I hated class, but I love to learn things.
Yes. So I, by a very happy coincidence, found out that I was in a position to graduate early from high school, which gave me the opportunity to do early acceptance for college, lock myself in, get a full ski season, live alone, but still stay on track. And so that's what I ended up doing. And I basically set myself up. So my junior year of high school, I was teaching skiing at Tyrol Basin in Wisconsin, getting my certifications so that I could have a job, and, figured all that stuff out. I left school during Thanksgiving break to do my ski instructor training in Aspen, flew back. And then I think 4 days after I turned 18, graduated early and drove across the country and did a season here. So that's what initially got me out here, and it was so fun.
That's so cool. And did you never left, or did you go other places in between?
I did. So I ended up doing 4 seasons in Aspen. So that season, and then the first 3, I guess, in college. Is that right? I think that's right. And then I went to school in Boulder. So I would trade back and forth, do the athlete schedule where I'd go to summer school fall semester and then take winter semester off to ski and be in Aspen. I did that 2 of the years. One of the years I actually stayed in class, but I had a flex schedule. There was like 2 days a week, so I would split time, and teach skiing, work restaurant job, and compete. And so I did that for a while, and then 2007 is when I really took the turn to get more formally involved in the political space. I had been, I'd done Lead America, I'd done Model UN. Like there was some interest, but it was not at all what I thought about myself. I really thought of myself as an athlete. And 2007, the primaries kicked off, and I was enraptured, as many of us were back then, which led to me going, oh, I can also graduate early from college and go back to Chicago and try to get a job on the campaign. I'm going to give that a go. And so I left. I was out of Colorado for maybe 3.5 years, Chicago, DC, Chicago, little stint in Asia. And then wow. I have been back here full-time year-round since, I think, spring 2011. I'm just getting to the point, you'll probably relate, Jeff, of age where I'm like, I don't actually know what years were what or for how long.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, it's crazy what a difference, getting a little bit older makes on that front, right? It's like when you're growing up, every year seems so huge and significant. So,
yeah, which is something I'm reminded of too when watching political news, and they're like, do you know what you said in 2014? I'm like, who the hell remembers what they said in 2014? Like, come on, guys.
Yeah, I get frustrated by that because, I certainly have grown as a person in the last 10, 15 years plus. And, so I don't always feel great when they're like, well, 10 years ago, you tweeted this. And, well, yeah, that was dumb. I've grown up.
100%. But that is the sign of a conscious mind and a human taking ownership, which for me, and I'll just say for me, because everyone has their own preferences, is the sign of responsible, effective leadership. So I'm looking for a candidate or a leader who can call out the journalist lovingly, right? Kindly, pointing out why that's a challenging question, but also having the self-awareness to know, even if they don't remember the quote, why they might have said something like that, to own where they've grown and why, and how their mind has shifted. To me, that's where you hit home runs and you turn, quote unquote, threat, anger, vitriol into a healing or a bridging behavior. When I see the person who, reflexively just doubles down, I could never be wrong, that's a red flag to me.
Yes. Yeah, and there's way too much of that in our society as a response to some of these.
Mm-hmm. And it's a fear-based response too. We have to recognize that they are also humans who feel under attack, and somewhere along the way they learned either from a consultant who told them, hey, this works. And, from some perspective, it does work, although not for us or for them, but for the job, I suppose. Somewhere along the way they learn that strategy. And it's also an opportunity for them to recognize that just because they've used that strategy before doesn't mean they need to in the future either. And when they're able to come into a community that is welcoming, that provides the tools and support, that doesn't judge them for doing that or tell them that they're a bad person, but simply that they've learned some unhelpful habits, and provide support for them to come back to where they really want to be, that's a welcome invitation that will serve them, their community, and their outcomes.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned sort of that deep dive into politics in 2008. And you talked about some of the places you went and the stint in Asia. What was that just like for you mentally and your growth over that time as a human? I mean, that's a very impressionable age that you were at.
Yeah, I mean, it was all very exciting, very enthralling. I'm blessed to be just in the rapture of life a lot, like just to really appreciate it and, to suck the marrow out of life, so to speak. I just have that in me. And that can come in the good and the bad. I've gone down both rabbit holes, but, that campaign was incredible. It was what a moment in history to be part of. If your first job out of college is unpaid and then barely paid, and you're working 20 hours a day, sleeping on your desk, and you love it, like something's gone right. Something's gone right. On the other hand, I then shifted to another campaign where our candidate was spending his time on TV, holding up a piece of paper saying, "I'm not signing a document to sell a U.S. Senate seat." So I also got to experience the toxicity of the space immediately afterwards. And I always say the glitter kind of, fell off the walls and onto the floor and became a big mess. And so I got to see both of those things, in pretty short order. I got to see a lot of beautiful, heart-led possible behavior. And I got to see a lot of selfish and just greedy, problematic behavior.
Yeah, I can imagine. And somehow during this time, you also were able to be the COO of an electric vehicle startup. Tell me about that.
Well, I don't think that's really fair. I mean, that's sort of true. It is true. It's not so true.
I mean, as somebody that's done a ton of startups, that's on your LinkedIn, but as someone that's done tons of startups, I've done, I've done every role at every time in every way. So nothing you could tell me about it will make me think any less of it, because I know it was a lot of work.
Well, so my stepdad is a serial entrepreneur, very wide ranging, from running a large nightclub chain in the 80s and restaurants to the Children of Heroes Foundation, supporting kids whose parents lost their lives during 9/11 and service workers, to electric vehicles. So we're like all over the map. And so he, at the time, was working on an electric vehicle company. These are things that are very commonplace now, kind of, the 10 to 16 passenger vehicles that you might see taking people around a theme park or a botanic garden, something like that. This was, I think, 2011, maybe 2012. So they were not commonplace or well known or well understood at that point. And he had a direct connection, and I think he had an exclusive on the technology, either in the U.S. or in certain states. I can't quite recall, but he was struggling to find a market that was ready for that, that was ready to kind of take the risk on electric. And I was in a transition period coming off of the last campaign that I had ran and working on starting this film project out of nowhere. And so I didn't really have any income at that point. And he asked me if I wanted to come on to the team and help with the strategic approach to sales, marketing, advertising, etc. And so I did, but it was a very part-time thing.
Got it. Very cool. And you mentioned just now like a film production.
Yeah. So this is out of the history books. My best friend at the time, who passed away, unfortunately. Kind of at the end of this process, unrelated, just a freak thing. He and I were both mutually obsessed with a handful of things, but amongst them included travel, Anthony Bourdain and Top Gear, and Hunter S. Thompson and sort of Gonzo history. And somewhere on a ski trip to Utah, we came up with this total flyer of an idea to start a show, which became called Gonzo. And it's basically an adaptation of Gonzo journalism to the international scene. Where my head was at that time was, I still thought politics where you could create change at scale, but I was very frustrated by what I had seen on the Illinois race. The union bosses and the power structure and the indentured leadership in Springfield, and just the implacability of it. And it just felt like everything was going to be so hard and take so long. And I thought, all right, you know what, let's take a swing for the fences and see if we can shift people's thinking and culture in a way that is faster through the use of multimedia. And as travelers, as people whose lives had been probably more meaningfully impacted by going to places people would say you shouldn't than any school we had been to, we thought, well, what if we took this notion of Gonzo journalism, which is, effectively to embed yourself in a place. So for Hunter, that might have been with the Hells Angels, or it might have been on the McGovern campaign or at the Kentucky Derby. And to live that experience, and through the living of that experience, tell a story that might be partially fictional and partially fact, but could reveal a deeper truth that was more connective and transcendent to the audience so that they could actually understand what was happening. And so we thought, well, what if we applied that to the international scene so that young Americans, instead of just having a caricature of other countries as, the people that hate us, they hate our freedom. Okay, what does that mean? What is life really like on a human level? And so that became Gonzo, and that's why we were in Asia. We spent some time shooting for about a month in Laos, which was an amazing experience. Wow.
Where did that show ultimately end up? And have you done anything else in that space?
I haven't. It was so fun. I just adored it. I would, if anyone out there is producing, wants to put it together, let me know. We'll go out there and get some stuff done. I knew nothing about film. I had never picked up an SLR in my life. I had at that point never built a team for anything. I'd never raised money. There were so many firsts, but I just thought, let's do it. And it was cool because I got to learn how to put a lot of the pieces together. I raised enough money to do the pilot. I built the team, or I didn't build the team, but I brought the team together. And then I played a number of different roles, a number of hats. So I wrote the script effectively. I helped line produce. I did all of the, logistics of shooting in a communist country and government minders and, all of that. Like, how do you get permission to go shoot in a casino where, certain people are not allowed to be? And how do you get permission to go shoot at a UXO project where we're exploding ordnance that were dropped by American planes in the quote unquote secret war and are still maiming children to this day? How do you get away with some Hunter S. Thompson vibes of taking or not taking? Who knows what happened? A psychedelic mushroom on camera to open up the window of connective tissue to both that history, but also to this wild town that's being subsidized by the government to sell bottles of whiskey for $1 to attract Westerners and tourist dollars. And but people are getting hurt. And, it was just a wild process. And I was focused on the creation and the creative, which is what I tend to be better at. And, kind of got all that together. And, the episode's still out there. It's on YouTube. And I think it holds up. I mean, I watch it and I'm like, wow, this is actually pretty good.
Well, I'm definitely going to check that out. We'll link it in the show notes too.
Yeah. Cool. Gonzo. But what ended up happening is I basically entirely outsourced, which is not a bad call, kind of the whole, what do we do next after we do this pilot, to my director and my talent / producer, who had been doing film for years, had been working together forever, were really good at it. They both have really successful careers right now in film, and timing can be everything. And so we got back and we were all kind of not working to do this. And we were all really cash strapped and taking extra jobs. So the editing process took longer and then longer and then longer. And in the middle of that, they had a friend and business breakup, and that kind of sunk the project, and I didn't really know what to do. I called in a few kind of Hail Marys to try to get some traction. We ended up having it air in a number of states on state or regional networks. But I didn't have a clue where to go from there, and it just sort of wilted on the vine.
If you're enjoying this episode, I would greatly appreciate if you could review, comment, or subscribe on your favorite platforms. Your engaged support goes a long way in helping the show grow and getting our impactful guests heard. Now back to the show. Yeah, well, just I can certainly relate to that experience, not the crazy aspects of doing it in a communist country, but having created a lot of film content over the years, built those kinds of teams, worn all those hats. People don't realize how much you can learn being on a set wearing all these hats until you do it. So I imagine that stuck with you, that experience.
Oh my God. I mean, I loved it. It was amazing. And I should also say, lest that we get in trouble, I believe technically Laos at that time is not a communist country. It is a socialist country. That's my own fault. I did that.
Yeah, no, I was just going off. Yes, appreciate the clarification. So all right, so you like to you've been dabbling at this point in a few different things, and where did your career journey take you next?
Yeah, it was at that point that I moved back to Aspen because I found myself doing post production in Boulder. No offense, Boulder, but just not the place that I want to live. I wasn't going to go back to Chicago, and I just kind of went, well, why am I not living in Aspen? If I don't have to be somewhere for work, why would I not be there? And so I moved back, and I had no intention of getting involved in anything political at that time. And I, I'd always kind of held that out as a possibility in my head when I stepped away. I thought, well, let me go. I'm young. Let me go try some stuff. I can always go back. But I had no active plans to go back. But I ended up getting dragged into a series of events that got me very central in our local politics here. Interestingly enough, and maybe slightly poetically, working with all of the remaining folks from Hunter's Days, and yeah, so it was just I got sort of dragged back into the political space by moving back here accidentally.
Yeah, well, I mean, and that's kind of what we talked about earlier with people getting involved in their local politics for the right reasons. And despite you getting dragged in, I'm sure that's what kept you in it.
Oh yeah, I mean, it became clear that if you actually want to get something done, you do it locally. That things can really move and change quickly. Now, when you're in it, it doesn't feel quick, or it didn't to me. But relative to any sort of national work, I mean, when was the big initial gang? Was it the Gang of Eight, the Gang of 12 with John McCain on immigration? I mean, when was that? And we're still having that argument.
Yeah.
So relative to that, things can really move. And then there's also just the direct feedback of seeing someone get a home.
Yeah.
Seeing a kid that is struggling get care or food.
Yeah.
Seeing affordable, restaurant concept go up in a place where most locals are priced out of the local, dining scene.
Yeah.
Those are like real things,
Yeah.
and so yeah, there's a beautiful feedback loop at the local level.
Okay. So you started getting involved in the Aspen political scene. You know, what what was your next step from there? Or, how did you, tell me about the path from this point until, let's start digging toward today.
Sure. Well, I mean, the initial thing that drew me in is our city council as one of its top 10 goals, and this would have probably been 2012, was to get young people more invested in the political space. And so they held like a series of whiteboard sessions, and that's what I initially got dragged into. I'll give you the truncated version, but you're welcome to double click on anything. A group of us coalesced and recognized that what was happening in this exercise was a glorified bitching session. Nothing wrong with that, but it was like, I want this, I need this, please fix this. And that's great, but that doesn't actually answer the question that was being asked, which is getting young people involved in politics. It was asking the question of, what do young people want right now? And then you solve that and they're still not involved. And so we sought to create a body that could live in perpetuity, that would give young people a voice on not just the issue of today, but the issue of tomorrow. And we ended up forming a commission of the city. So like a historical preservation commission or a planning and zoning commission or a parks commission, but that focused on long-term policy, 18 to 40 demographic. And I ended up chairing that for a while. We got to work on a bunch of issues that were really successful. We were able to advocate for several $1 million more in childcare funding. We were able to get a number of big policy wins around affordable housing, both construction and then structural reforms and optimizing for units that weren't being effectively used. We have an aging population here. And so you end up in a situation where there's a 3, 4, 5 bedroom unit, but there's one person living in it, but there's financial reasons that person can't really move and it's their home, but yet we've got these 4 empty bedrooms and there's a housing crisis. So how can we find elegant solutions that serve everybody to maximize the use of that, but also care for all members of our community? We worked on voter turnout. We ran a ballot initiative. We changed the election date. We increased voter turnout by 26% off the all-time high, which is insane. Yeah. And so, just a lot of like, wow, look at what we can do. The mayor asked me to join planning and zoning. I chaired that for a while, and then led me into running, losing, running again, winning, serving, learning a lot, coming in with a lot of insecurity, a lot of ego, a lot of just not thinking I knew what I was doing, but not knowing what I was doing at all, thinking that I had run campaigns and I'd run ballot initiatives, so I know how this works, but I really, really didn't. It's a very different experience. And so my first 2 years were pretty challenging. And my second 2 years, we got more done than any council has done in 30, 35 years, kind of going back to those post-Hunter days, that big flurry of things that shaped our valley, which was exciting. It was cool. And I also found myself in, and this is like the transition, I suppose, to today, is I found myself in COVID, working from effectively a 300 square foot studio in isolation. I'm not made for isolation. That is not for me. Working 80 to 100 hours a week, my full-time income bearing job. Because remember, almost everyone who's an elected official or a public servant has 2 jobs, if not 3, because these jobs don't pay anything. I did the math once. I was making less than minimum wage. I was making like $6 and something cents an hour when amortized over the hours. And that job, maybe was not going to exist because it was running a vacation rental company. So I was like, oh, maybe I'll have no income tomorrow. So there was a lot going on, a lot of responsibility. And then you have all the incoming, right? Because people are understandably afraid and scared. And so you have all of the hatred and anger and threats being directed inward at you. And this is something that's familiar to anyone who is working in a public service role during COVID. I found myself in a very interesting position. It was probably the best year I've ever had in terms of personal growth and transformation and meeting my partner for life. I was in a place at that moment by dumb luck where, and we've talked about kind of the highlights of my life, the things that look successful that are in LinkedIn, but I also struggled with alcohol. I struggled with drug addiction. I struggled with all kinds of behavioral issues, anxiety. Those were my shadow presentations of some of the adverse childhood events that I faced. Yeah. But I had the privilege and good fortune to be able to work on those, to go to programs or retreats, or to have the time to read or process or talk to a coach. I had the opportunity to do a lot of processing by that point. And so rather than being in the place I had been previously, where all of those incoming pressures would have crushed me, instead, they actually became the tools to my freedom. And I was able to use those inputs to up-level my own experience, my own practices. And so I was in this very good place. And I looked around me and I saw a lot of folks who had better resumes, more experience, better titles, more income, who were clearly really struggling. And if you were in leadership at this time, you know what that was like. You met someone, and within 2 minutes, you knew how they were handling it. It was tough, and that's okay. There's no right or wrong for how people were, but you knew. And because my income bearing job was in question, and because I was coming into this place of more full alignment, I was asking myself the question, how could I align the entirety of my experience towards service and to dedicate my life to that completely, professionally, personally, energetically, etc. And at the time, because I had been doing a lot of this work, I had a framework for how I approached leadership and what I wanted to focus on. And I had these 4 pillars. At the time, I thought of my mission as shifting political culture, because I saw the culture as what was in the way of the progress. And these pillars didn't have to be like they could be independent, but they were mutually reinforcing. It was things like systems and process reform, universal voter participation, bringing people together across ideologies. And then there was this 4th pillar, which I honestly didn't even know what it meant, which sounds so silly, but it just, call it intuition, call it foresight. But the 4th one was connecting the worlds of politics and wellness. And I really didn't know what that meant. I just knew it was important. And so I started, looking at those and trying to figure out where I would apply my unique contribution. And when I looked at those 4 pillars, 3 of them, I knew people personally who were doing remarkable work, making a difference, years head start. And then I looked at that wellness and politics piece and went, oh, no, I don't know anyone who's even talking about this.
Yeah.
And so I just started to poke on it. And, 3 years later, or whatever it is, now we're talking.
Yeah. I'm sure that was quite the process. I mean, it's something that people have to, I think, open up a little bit, be vulnerable to even dig into, if they're in politics and they want to start talking about their healing.
Yeah. And, candidly, it's something that I wrestle with, is how do we communicate this to folks? And I know that the way that I naturally communicate it is not the most effective. I also know that the key value in this work is integrity. It's the key value for me and how I show up. It's the key value in the work. It's what makes the work possible if you are applying it as a client. You can't be out of integrity and be in this work, because we can only work with what is, and we have to take radical ownership and responsibility to up-level our experience. And I know that sounds like a bunch of what did he just say to so many folks. And so I do wrestle with that. Should we be talking about it differently? Should we be saying that if you want to be an effective leader, this is what you have to do? If you want to be a leader with longevity, this is what you have to do. If you want to be a leader who passes that housing policy for your community, that brings your council together, that lowers the temperature in the room, this isn't an option. This is what you have to do. And it really
goes back
is.
to leaving a legacy, like you were talking about before. If you actually want to leave one, you need to do this work.
You have to do this work. And I think we can look to history to see that. I would argue, you correct me if I'm wrong, but like now we're looking at the sort of what's on TV. And I think the dominant attitude or approach to leadership most closely resembles, McCarthy on the left and Wallace on the left and McCarthy on the right. Yeah. I don't think these are people that many of us lionize or look back on well. They got a lot of attention in their day. They held office in their day, but it was fleeting because the morality behind their leadership was not about who they were leading. It was about themselves. And that we don't respect through the sands of time. If you look at the leaders that are nearly universally lionized, the Nelson Mandelas, the Abe Lincolns, the Teddy Roosevelts, right? And notice they're from all the parties. It doesn't matter. These are people who started out in a more traditional leadership role. They were clearly gifted leaders. But they had a moment, in some cases, Nelson's a 28-year moment of being imprisoned, of deep hardship. And they didn't give up. They didn't turn away. They also didn't deny their moment. They used that as the crucible to go inward. And when they emerged as leaders that were much more powerful, but they were more powerful because they were leaders who could bring people together, who could look beyond their own selfish interests, to look beyond their lived life experience, and to paint and bring us into a vision of the world that was more connected, more together, more effective. Those are the people that we remember. Those are the people that we lionize. And if you seek to be a leader like that, this is the work that you have to do. You cannot step into the world and be able to empathetically meet the person who maybe you've hated or you've judged. Abe Lincoln famously says, "There's a man I don't like. I must get to know him." Nelson talks about the importance of knowing your enemy, quote unquote, because otherwise you will lose to them every time.
Yeah, that's really powerful, and certainly something, as I've grown as a person, if I don't like someone, I try to think about it like that. Like it's that's on me. Everybody, to me, everybody has significant potential. Everybody is intensely capable at at their own way that they're living their lives, and there's something to learn. So that's a great way to look at it. And just while we were talking, leaders that came to my mind of that ilk are Winston Churchill, Golda Meir. People that I think back on all the time. I mean, even, an author like Viktor Frankl.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And I mean, Winston's a great example. Most people probably don't realize that he was reviled for most of his career. I mean, they really couldn't stand him. He was viewed by many to be self-important, privileged, combative, selfish. But it was the war that reformed him, that allowed him to really, I think he would have said, fulfill his destiny. I mean, he famously tells somebody when he's in his, like, I can't remember the exact details, but I read an infinitely long book about him. I think he's in his like early 20s, that basically predicting the war, like the world is going to come to calamity, and I will be here to rise to that occasion. And he does. And the thing that I always connect with him, and he and I share a birthday, so I've actually done a lot of dives into him and his work, is, when the blitz happens, when the bombs are falling, he doesn't go down into the cellar where he's supposed to go. He goes to the fucking roof and he walks the streets and he lets people see them, right? I'm with you. I am you. Like there's no stronger symbol of I'm putting your needs ahead of mine than I'm literally putting my life at risk when I have the safest place to be. But it took that hardship to transform him in that way.
Yeah. Yeah, it does take hardship, I think, in most cases, to transform people into, their highest potential self.
That's right. That's right. I mean, friction is how diamonds are created. And if you are in leadership now, whether you are an administrator or a staffer, I mean, I think of the poor staffers. Poor is probably not the word, but maybe I felt unfortunate for the staffers who, are just doing the work of following our direction as a council to put together policies that we decide, and have been, anonymous for the last, as far as I can remember, but all of a sudden are getting threatening emails directly for their work on something. All of us are now in a place where technology has made it so easy and anonymous for people to be cruel that we're all facing it. But congratulations, like that's the hardship that you can choose to use.
Yeah, that's true. And it sounds like you're doing some really powerful work with a lot of people right now. And I'm curious, if I'm a politician or otherwise listening, interested in working with you, what does that look like?
Yeah. So not just a politician or a public servant, but really anyone who would think of themselves as a public servant, right? So we say, from the school board to the teacher, from the police officer to the mayor, like these are the humans who are invested in making sure our world work. And so this work is available to all of you. And we do work in groups and we do work one-on-one. But really, we are, well, I'll kind of take you through the journey.
Yeah.
As you mentioned earlier, we did last week. We
Yeah.
launched it. I don't know when this is coming out. It could be months from now, but the Healing Our Politics podcast. And what we've learned is that privately, and if this is you behind closed doors, the vast majority of us are having a hard time and could use support. Most of us will never seek it because we're afraid of reputational harm. We're afraid of being targeted. We come from a community that doesn't yet have a budget for mental health or well-being support, or we're telling ourselves a story we don't have the time for it. And I say story intentionally because it is a story. The truth is you don't have the time not to. The reason you don't have time is because you haven't done this work. Once you become aligned and clear, once you have systems and processes, the problem of overwhelm will not persist long. When it arises, it'll be gone soon. So buy into that story at your own risk. But we wanted to create a resource that could meet everyone where they were. On your own time, privacy of your own earbuds where nobody has to know. So I just really encourage people to start their journey there. To hear other leaders' stories, to learn from experts. We'll have a wide variety of different folks that will speak to you at different points of your journey. Next week we're doing Dr. Diana Smith. She's 40 or 45 years as a leading social scientist. She just released the book called Remaking the Space Between Us, and we're digging into the science and techniques of in-group, out-group thinking and how to determine if you're under the spell of a malevolent leader or if you're being led by something that's fictitious, or how to greet someone or meet someone who holds conspiracy theory in a way that's most likely to open their mind rather than, which is what you don't want to do, which is driving them further, which is what we end up doing unconsciously and unawarely. But do you want to solve the problem, or do you want to be right? So we get into a lot of that stuff. 2 weeks from then will be David Allen, who wrote Getting Things Done methodology, probably followed by as many billion-dollar CEOs and Fortune 5 folks in terms of designing your systems, your time management, your tasks, your reminders, like very tactical in such a way to almost entirely reduce stress from your life. We'll talk to yogis. So just a lot of different angles, and some will speak to you and some won't. But I think that's, it's a really beautiful place to start and just to get familiar and, let your shield come down a little bit. Let the ego relax and just say, hey, I'm spending the time. I chose to be here. What would it be like to really have an open mind right now? And if anything you hear resonates, join the Leader's Handbook newsletter. It is a simple once per month, only one email per month newsletter with a carefully curated selection of tools heard on the podcast over the last month. It's a one pager, and then you click and you get a downloadable PDF of how to. So how do I implement this in my life, or how do I teach it to my team? So you can start to see, do these things have an effect for you? In the coming months, we will be building a really beautiful community around that, because so many of us feel isolated and alone. We are the island in our individual communities, but it turns out there are thousands of islands in this country. And when you're not the only one, that you have support, you have a place to come be human that's confidential, things shift. And we've been doing that like within our client base, but we're going to expand it out to our audience in the next couple months. And I think that's a beautiful place to start. You did ask, how do people work with us? And the answer is, down the line in groups or one-to-one. We run cohort programs that bring together people at a peer level. So it might be all elected officials of a local level. It might be all staffers at municipalities and counties working on climate issues. It might, name your peer group. But so that's group work. It's affordable and it is connective. And then, of course, we do group work for organizations. So if you're having organizational issues, you want to align organizational values to individual wellness and well-being, you want to improve staff retention, it's basically a private cohort, right, for your senior staff. And those are a cool opportunity to get to know each other in a way that you wouldn't have otherwise.
Yeah, I mean, it just sounds really powerful to me. I mean, I know the power of meeting peers that you didn't know you had and having those conversations where people just really get you. The same way you were speaking towards, island in your community, but there's thousands of islands. That can be a really powerful force. And I think that right now, you talked about earlier, like privately, there's a lot of people struggling out there. And I think we're doing an okay job generally of trying to get people to talk more about those things. But it makes me think back to a former podcast guest, Todd Rose, an author of multiple great books, including Collective Illusions, which basically is that, private opinion data is very different from what people say. And, that they say to their friends, etc. And so making people feel like they're in a comfortable environment where they can truly share their truth goes in such a long way just in developing yourself and helping others develop around you.
Yeah. And if you are listening, I promise you are so far from alone. You are the norm in so many ways, and it's okay. It's okay to not feel okay. It's okay to be depressed. It's okay to be anxious. This is your body responding functionally. These are millennial old biological warning systems that something's off. The problems happen when we don't correct the behavior, we don't correct the environment, but we put our head down and say, oh, I just got to tough it out. And then we see hypertension, we see blood pressure rise, we see cardiac disease, we see obesity, we see diabetes, we see cognitive decline. All of these things are downstream of living in unhealthy, unaligned environments. And so rather than judging the experience of stress or frustration or overwhelm, the work is figuring out what it's actually there to teach you and then shifting your approach to life in such a way that those warning lights on the dash of your car turn off because you've gone in for service. And when you do that, you become much more effective as a leader, in addition to a much better person for your husband or wife to be with, or your kids. I mean, the number of people that we talk to, like the things that you'd never think about getting into this work. When we ask clients, what are some of the things that they're most excited by in terms of their growth, the thing that comes up a lot is like, I'm nicer to my kids. Not what we were aiming at, but that it's a system, like the body is a system.
Yeah. Yeah, as a parent that can get stressed sometimes, I can certainly relate to that, and that's kind of the ultimate, is like working on yourself and your being enough to where you are this calmer version of yourself in so many more places.
Yeah, finding inner peace is also finding outer peace.
Yeah, so I will certainly be signing up for the newsletter to start. I'm excited to dig in personally, and I'm sure others are inspired to as well. And I've got kind of a handful of sort of zoomed out questions, kind of macro questions I like to ask. And so maybe the first one's a little more micro, but macro in your career, is there a story where you remember or where it really hit you how much your work could directly affect change or affect someone's life?
The first story that comes to mind is not super conventional, but I was running a campaign for city council, and there was a woman who just was leaving really nasty comments online. And in particular, my communications director, who I adored, close friend of mine, helping out in the campaign just because she cared. So this woman left a very nasty comment for her, and that person came to me in tears. I'm I'm just trying to do some good stuff. I'm not even getting paid. This, what the fuck? And so I took the initiative and reached out to this person just online, just in a Facebook message, I think. And, without being accusatory in any way, I just said, hey, I just want you to know you left a comment. I'm obviously paraphrasing from memory, but you left a comment for this person. I just want you to know she's a really remarkable human being who's working hard for her community. You might not agree with her on things, and that's fine. But what you said was really hurtful, and she was in tears yesterday. And I don't know if that's your intent or not. I can't know what's in your heart or your head, but I just want you to know what's happening. And if you ever want to talk about that, I would enjoy getting together. And to her credit, she reached out and we started chatting, and I got to know her. And it's a person that I probably would have judged from afar because we had very different community affiliations, and I would have made assumptions that were totally untrue. And what I came to learn is she's a really sweet lady whose son tragically died. I believe he took his own life, although I'm not 100% sure that's correct. And her response to that was to get more aggressive on the internet, hoping to help other people not end up where he did. And it was just totally not connecting, and didn't know that. But with that opening of seeing each other's real intent and heart, we went on to work together on the campaign and on future campaigns to connect into the Catholic community that I have no direct connection to, and into the Latino community in this valley that I've always wanted to have more connection to, but didn't really know how. But she did, because, she volunteered at her church, and she volunteered at a food bank, and she volunteered at an organization that serves new arrivals. And yeah, it was for me, it's just such a reminder of, it's not always about the big policy or the big win, but it's the little choices that we make that then open up the possibilities for everyone. So that's the first thing that came to mind.
I mean, I think that's a beautiful story, and certainly had tremendous impact on both of those lives directly involved. And I think it also, it just makes me think to sort of the toxicity of a lot of internet comments, and what if we could have somebody really dig into what is the trauma and intention behind this comment? If there was a you for all of these people leaving these comments all over the internet, even if you could get a small percentage of them to just be more self-aware of what they're doing, who they're hurting, why they're saying it, what a tremendous impact that could have.
It absolutely could. And not everyone's going to be available to receive that message, and that's okay. But what is important to know is that no one will receive that message when it comes from a energy and with the language of you are wrong and you are the problem. You have to be willing to meet that person with love and compassion, with openness, with non-judgment. And in doing so, then you cultivate the condition for the healing to occur. But if you get on your righteous high horse and tell that person how stupid and wrong that they are, whether you are aware of it or not, you are contributing to that action. You are complicit in the outcome you claim not to want, because now you are taking that person who is either misunderstood or has felt isolated and shunned in some way and is actually responding from fear and from isolation, and you're reinforcing their mindset of they're not welcome, etc. And so now they have to establish their own dominance, ego, place, etc. by being more extreme and fighting fire with fire. And that doesn't work. And so, your job is to do your inner work so that you can meet them in such a way that they have the opportunity to come back into the circle.
Yeah. What a tremendously better place the internet could be if more people were on that mindset. So hopefully this will be pervasive.
The internet is what we make it, folks. So a little bit by
Yes.
little bit, and we're all still going to be human, and we're going to say dumb shit, and we're going to fuck it up, and that's the reality too.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you'd like, this is the point in the show where you can ask me a question.
Why is the motivation question so important to you?
I like that. To me, motivation is what drives it, at least again for me, it drives my actions in life. It drives why I do everything. And like you said, the true answer for everyone is likely quite multifaceted. But at least your initial reaction to that question tends to tell me about somebody, about who they are. And so when I'm digging into why people are what I call innovators in social impact, people who are, working every day to create positive social impact, I find that the motivation often paints a picture of like why they are where they are, why they do what they do. And my goal, one of the goals with the show is to show how somebody became this way, what led them to be, and like what attributes of you could, that resonate with me could make me more like that. And so I think some people just don't think about things from various perspectives. So you get a lot of new perspectives on motivation when I ask people these questions. So, certainly there's a lot of answers around family and things like that. But there's also, you gave a really in-depth answer about the multifaceted nature of motivation. And someone else might say, I'm motivated because XYZ in my community. Like when I do this, I see this happen in my community. And someone else might be like, oh, I do that. I never even thought about that, making that change, etc. So it's, for me, it's really, as someone that's very empathetic, like motivation tends to be what drives me, whether it's empathy towards myself or towards others, depending on the situation. So yeah, it's really just me trying to create inspiration in people by hearing what these inspirational people are driven by.
So what I'm hearing in that is there's a core understanding for you that motivation is a lead domino. And so there's an innate interest in understanding where people are coming from. But as a human and a podcast host, it's also a great early insight for you as to where you can lead the conversation, where someone is going to be comfortable and want to respond from in such a way that you can unearth some of those gems that are transferable to both you and the audience.
Exactly. You said it much better than I did.
That's cool. Very, very cool.
Yeah. I mean, that particular question, it varies in terms of how good the quality is in what people ask me. And so I thought that was really good. Thank you for that. And, if everything were to end tomorrow, whatever it is that means to you, what are you most grateful for or most proud of up to this point?
Yeah, the first thing that came to my mind is the relationship I'm in. I have consciously and unconsciously projected a lot of my trauma and life experience on past partners in a way that I'm not proud of. And I am extremely proud that I have at least learned from those experiences and arrived in a just beautiful, mutually supportive, conscious partnership that, hopefully will be with me until that question becomes a reality. And that's given me a lot of pride these days. It's where a lot of my focus is personally these days. So I think that, and then the friendships that I've built, yeah.
That's awesome. I mean, there's certainly tons of people in the world that either the relationship's not a top priority or it's not something they're proud of. And I think to be in a place where you're able to say that is really powerful and remarkable and shows the time and dedication you've given to that.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah.
And, my favorite question that I always ask toward the end, if you could snap your fingers and fix one thing in the world, what would it be? And how do you think that change would reverberate?
So I don't actually believe in the concept of fixing. I think it's more about evolving.
We talked about repairing the world, so it comes from a place of tikkun olam, like in the word terms of the verbiage.
Sure. Yeah. I just say that because I think, and especially in the political space, we can get so focused on the problem and what needs to be fixed, and they're wrong. And it's like, no, we are where we are. What do we do with it? Climate change might be a challenge, but we are here. If we deny that it exists, we're not well suited to solve it. So let's accept that it exists and then move forward. But if I could have one intervention, I'll put it that way. I might rephrase a little bit for you. I was asked this once before, and I just still think it's the right answer for me. This was years ago. Are you a Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy fan by chance?
It has been a long time since I've consumed it, but yes.
Okay, well, I'm kind of obsessed because it's awesome and hilarious and so smart. But the characters are searching for kind of like the best treasure in the universe, and when they arrive, they find an empathy gun, and it's basically like a shotgun that you point at someone, and when you pull the trigger, they instantly understand everything in your experience. And so, if I could find a way to impart that ability on every human, that would be the answer.
Yes, that's beautiful. Yeah, I really, empathy goes such a long way. And, that's why I hope that people listen to others being vulnerable and show how it can be helpful for them. Because when you are vulnerable with people, if there's any empathy in their heart, they tend to find a place for you. And it makes me think back to, a lot of like changing hearts and minds, that I've either been involved with or studied. So, for instance, a producer, Scott Budnick, who's in, kind of produces content around criminal justice reform of late, including the awesome movie Mercy. He mentioned that he retired from the film space to go into criminal justice reform. And then he got into that and realized, I actually need to be back where I was to create this impact. He had met people involved in marriage equality who said, slowly but surely having shows on the air like Will and Grace and Modern Family actually soften people's hearts. And I think that everyone should keep that in mind in terms of finding places they can be comfortable being vulnerable, because that will continue to soften the hearts of others, to make people more understanding, and to lead us toward a world where we do implement your intervention of the empathy gun.
Yeah, luckily it's not my intervention, it's yours, and you all can choose to pick it up. And even if the machinery is not familiar to you and you don't know how to be precise with your empathy rifle like the Olympians going on today, you can learn. Everyone can learn.
And, we talked about how to get involved in your work. Is there any other way that you want to share that people listening who are inspired can support you and your impact?
Oh, I so appreciate that. The podcast and all of these educational resources are donor funded. We have a 501c3 foundation. And so if people go to electedleaderscollective.com and click the donate button, you can get a tax deductible benefit for your donation, and know that you are making a meaningful impact to healing our politics, and also joining an amazing community of conscious folks who are really putting outcomes in community first. And it's also a great way for you to connect with that group from a place of service.
Awesome. And we'll make sure to include all the resources in the show notes. And I just want to thank you so much for your time. Your story is incredible. I love your work. I love your perspective on life, and, learning about your journey of growth. I look forward to continuing our conversation, to spending some time in person together in the near future. And thank you so much.
Yes, I can't wait to have you guys up here. It'll be here. We transform this into your room.
Awesome. Let's do it.
I really appreciate it, Jeff. This has been really fun, and it's always a good lesson for me to be on the other side, and you do it really well. So thanks, brother.
Appreciate it. Thanks for checking out this episode of People Are the Answer. For more information, go to peoplearetheanswer.com. Please like, subscribe, rate, whatever you can do on various platforms. We really appreciate the support. And if you're interested, check out my other podcast, The Late Game Podcast. You can learn more at thelategame.com. Thanks.